Here's a technique I first did a couple of years ago in the Classic Effects column of Photoshop User Magazine. It's an oldie but a goodie, and that is to simulate drops of water on something. It could be on the leaves of a plant. In this case, we're going to make it look like someone has dropped little water droplets all over our image. So we're going to start off with a new layer, and we're going to fill that layer with white. Now my background color is white, so I can just press Command Delete or Control Backspace. And on that layer, we need to do that because we're going to add noise, and you can't add noise to a blank layer. It has to be something on it. So we're going to make sure it says monochromatic, Gaussian, and we're going to push it all the way up. Now, as always with a lot of these tutorials, of course, there's a lot of potential for experimentation. So if you wanted to, you could press Command or Control F to reapply the noise again and kind of randomize it even further. Again, that's just an optional step. At this point, we are now going to add a nice Gaussian blur. And we need to blur it a fair bit. And again, this is where the experimentation, if you go too far, you of course will see nothing. You want to still have it so you're seeing some areas of like dark and light. So somewhere in this kind of range. And of course, this will also depend on the resolution of your file. The higher the resolution, the further you can probably blur. Now, to make these start to look like water droplets, we're going to go to Image Adjustments and then Threshold. And when you do, you see this dialog box pops up, and what it does is it just takes away all those shades of gray, and now you can see I'm getting some kind of random shapes. If I move to the left, I get less drops. If I move to the right, it becomes covered in droplets. So basically, we need to find some kind of happy medium of how big we want our drops and how many of them we want. And of course, you can always go back afterwards and kind of erase these a little bit, take some away. I'm going to just do another Gaussian blur, but a very, very slight one this time, probably 1 or even less than 1, because one of the things that Threshold does is it makes the edges a little bit hard, and I want to just soften them up just a little bit. All right. Now we're going to take the magic wand. We want to get rid of all this white. So I'm just going to click anywhere on the white. It should select all of it. Just hit the delete key, and that gets rid of all the white. Now I'm going to inverse the selection because I want to select the water droplets. And we're going to fill that with gray. Now I happen to, from before, had gray as my color, but if you didn't, of course, you would have to choose a nice kind of medium gray and then fill those selected areas and deselect them. And now to make them hopefully look a little more like water droplets, we're going to use Bevel and Emboss. And I'm going to try to position this so you can kind of see some of my water droplets. Obviously, you have to try to do this so you can see what you're doing. You want to put the size up a little bit, soften it a little bit, and maybe make the depth just a little more. But again, you want to be a little cautious about how far. And again, you may have to experiment, try it, and then go back. We're just going to now, I like to make the highlights a little more obvious and the shadows just a little less obvious for this. Okay, and now to make them really look like water droplets, we're going to change the blend mode of this layer to hard light. And you see now you can see through the drops, so it's starting to look a little more like things are actually on water on the image. Now, of course, if there really was water on top of a photograph, we'd see some distortion there where the water was kind of distorting the photo. So let's try to simulate that. We'll duplicate the background layer. I'm going to now Command or Control click on this selection to load as a selection and then choose Save Selection. Click OK. And then I can deselect it. Now I'm going to hide this water droplets layer and make sure I'm on the background copy, and then we're going to use this filter called Liquify. I've tried to make Liquify as small as I possibly can, but there's still a limit to how small it can be. So unfortunately, just outside the film area, if you look at the bottom of the Liquify palette, you will see a command or an option called Show Backdrop. We want to take that off, because otherwise what would happen is we try to distort this photo, we'd still see the background layer below, so it'd be a little bit confusing. So we're now going to load that alpha channel that we created. Yours would be called Alpha 1, assuming you didn't rename it. And then we're going to take the bloat tool, and all I'm going to do is wherever I see a water droplet where there's some detail, like the horizon line, for example, I'm just going to start kind of pulling and pushing with the bloat tool to try to change those areas. So basically underneath in the areas of the photo, what's happening is this red mask is acting as like a freeze tool, so whatever I do in here, you won't really see the results except where there's water droplets. So see how I'm going over some of the, there's not really much point in doing the sky because it's such a solid color, we won't really see it. So I'm going to over exaggerate some of these areas in here. And I'm not trying to be incredibly accurate, I'm just trying to show you the basic idea of this so you can play with it. And then we'll click OK to actually apply that. And you'll see I get a weird looking distortion, which will make a little more sense when we actually show the water droplets. Now you can see where the water droplet, there's a bit of distortion. Now when I look at it, it looks to me like it's a little bit much, so I'm just going to lower the opacity down a little bit on my water droplets, just so they're not quite so obvious. And there you go, a little simple way to create water droplets. Now you need to go ahead and experiment and try this with your variations to see what kind of results you get. By the way, this photo I'm using is one I took while I was in Mexico. You know, at this time when people are experiencing winter weather, I just wish I could be back there again. Well, maybe I can somehow, who knows. I'm Dave Cross, and as always, I shall see you next time.